The alarm buzzed at 4:47 a.m., same as every weekday for the past 8 months, and I rolled out of bed with the mechanical precision of someone who'd perfected the art of sleepwalking through life. 3 minutes to brush my teeth, 2 minutes to throw on my black jeans and the cafe's required navy polo, 30 seconds to grab my keys and wallet from the dresser where I'd placed them the night before. By 5:15, I was unlocking the heavy glass door of grind coffee, breathing in the familiar smell of yesterday's espresso grounds and industrial cleaning solution. The morning routine never varied. Flip the lights, start the first batch of house blend, arrange the pastries that our supplier delivered before dawn, wipe down tables that were already clean, and wait for the first wave of caffeine-dependent office workers to stumble through the door at exactly 6 a.m. If you're listening to this while getting ready for your own morning routine, drop a red heart if this hits you in the comments. I used to find comfort in the predictability, but lately, the sameness felt more like slowly drowning in lukewarm coffee. Every day blended into the next until I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuinely excited about anything. Work, home, sleep, repeat. The only variation came from which customers would be rude to me before they'd had their first sip of caffeine. That's why I almost didn't notice when Marcus, our perpetually frazzled manager, mentioned we'd have someone new starting on the morning shift. Jake something transferred from the evening crew to help with our increasingly busy breakfast rush. I nodded along while counting register drawers, filing the information away as just another minor disruption to my carefully maintained routine. The first morning Jake worked with me, I was running the espresso machine when he walked in at 5:30, 15 minutes later than I would have preferred. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When he smiled and said good morning, something in my chest did this weird flutter thing that I immediately pushed down and ignored. "Sorry I'm late," he said, grabbing an apron from behind the counter. "Still getting used to the early schedule. I'm more of a night owl usually." I shrugged, focusing intently on steaming milk. "It's fine. We've got about 20 minutes before the rush starts." But it wasn't fine, not in the way I expected. Instead of being annoyed by the disruption to my routine, I found myself glancing over at Jake as he worked, noting how he hummed quietly while arranging muffins, how he actually seemed to enjoy chatting with customers instead of just tolerating them. There was an energy about him that made the morning feel less like a march toward caffeine-fueled chaos and more like something that might actually be interesting. By the end of his first week, I realized I was looking forward to work in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. Not because the job had suddenly become fascinating, but because Jake would be there. He had this way of making even the most mundane tasks feel lighter, cracking jokes about our regulars' increasingly complicated drink orders or sharing random observations about the city that made me see familiar things differently. "You know that guy who orders the triple shot Americano with exactly 2 sugars? Jake said one morning as we prepped for opening. "He counts the sugar packets. Every single time. 1, 2, and then he stares at them for like 10 seconds before stirring." I found myself actually laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. I thought I was the only one who noticed that. "Oh, you notice everything," Jake said, and something in his tone made me look up from the espresso machine. "You're always watching, taking it all in. I like that about you." The flutter in my chest was back, stronger this time, and I had to turn away to hide whatever expression was probably showing on my face. I told myself it was nice to have a coworker who was actually friendly, someone who made conversation instead of just grunting acknowledgments across the counter. That's all this was. Just 2 guys who worked well together, who happened to have compatible senses of humor. But lying to yourself is exhausting work, and by Jake's second week, I was running out of energy to maintain the pretense. I started paying attention to things I had no business noticing, like how Jake's eyes crinkled when he laughed at something genuinely funny versus when he was just being polite. How he rolled up his sleeves differently than other people, pushing them up past his elbows and leaving them slightly uneven. How he said my name like it mattered, like he'd been thinking about it. The realization hit me on a Wednesday morning while Jake was explaining something about latte art to a customer who clearly didn't care but was too polite to interrupt. I wasn't just looking forward to work because Jake made it more bearable. I was looking forward to seeing Jake, specifically. To hearing his voice first thing in the morning, to catching glimpses of his smile, to those moments when our hands would accidentally brush while reaching for the same thing behind the counter. I was developing feelings for my male coworker, and no amount of internal rationalization was going to make that fact disappear. The panic set in immediately, the familiar weight of anxiety settling in my stomach like a stone. This was exactly the kind of complication I'd spent years avoiding, the kind of feeling that led to awkward conversations and ruined friendships and people looking at you differently once they figured out what you were really thinking. I'd gotten good at keeping those parts of myself locked away, at maintaining just enough distance from everyone to avoid exactly this situation. But Jake made it impossible to maintain that distance. He'd somehow slipped past all my carefully constructed barriers without even trying, and now I was standing there at 5:45 in the morning, watching him make small talk with our delivery guy, wondering what it would feel like if he looked at me the way I was looking at him. The smart thing would be to pull back, to return to the professional politeness that had served me well for 8 months of morning shifts. Keep conversations focused on work. Stop lingering near him while we cleaned up. Stop hoping he'd say something that might give me a clue about whether this feeling was as one-sided as I assumed it was. But as Jake finished with the delivery guy and turned back toward me with that easy smile, asking if I wanted him to start the second batch of dark roast, I realized that going back to the way things were before might not be possible anymore. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to shift it back. The next morning, I arrived at work expecting everything to feel different. I'd spent most of the night staring at my ceiling, replaying every interaction Jake and I had shared over the past 2 weeks, analyzing every smile and casual touch for meaning that probably wasn't there. I convinced myself that the strange flutter in my chest whenever he laughed was obvious to everyone, that somehow my carefully guarded feelings were written across my face in bold letters. But when I pushed through the cafe's back door at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than usual because I couldn't stand lying in bed anymore, Jake wasn't there yet. The familiar routine of unlocking the front door, switching on the espresso machine, and checking yesterday's closing notes felt hollow without his easy chatter filling the silence. I found myself glancing at the door every few seconds, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. At exactly 6 a.m., Jake burst through the back door carrying 2 steaming paper cups, his hair slightly messed from the wind outside. "Morning, Owen," he called out, that same warm smile spreading across his face as he held up one of the cups. "Thought you might want some actual good coffee before we start making the mediocre stuff." I stared at him, completely thrown off balance. "You brought me coffee?" "Yeah, there's this little place 2 blocks from my apartment that opens at 5:30. Their beans are incredible." He crossed the small space between us and held out the cup, his fingers brushing mine as I took it. The contact sent that familiar jolt through my system, but this time I couldn't pretend it was just static electricity. "I got you a medium roast with just a splash of cream. That's how you make yours here, right?" The fact that he'd been paying attention to how I prepared my coffee, that he'd gotten up even earlier than usual just to bring me something he thought I'd enjoy, made my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he said simply, taking a sip from his own cup while leaning against the counter. "Besides, I figured if we're going to be stuck together every morning for the foreseeable future, we might as well start the day right." The coffee was perfect, rich and smooth with just the right amount of cream. I couldn't remember the last time someone had done something this thoughtful for me, something so small yet so perfectly tailored to what I'd actually want. "This is really good," I managed, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Right? The owner is this older guy who's been roasting his own beans for like 30 years. He's got all these stories about the neighborhood from back in the day." Jake's eyes lit up as he talked, gesturing with his free hand. He was telling me about how this whole block used to be completely different before all the development happened. As we went through our opening routine, Jake starting the first batch of regular coffee while I prepped the pastry display, he kept up a steady stream of conversation that felt natural rather than forced. He asked about my neighborhood, whether I'd always lived in the city, what I liked to do when I wasn't working. Questions that should have made me uncomfortable, should have triggered my usual instinct to deflect and change the subject, but somehow didn't. "I've only been here about 2 months, he said as he wiped down the counter for the 3rd time, a nervous habit I was beginning to recognize. "Still figuring everything out, you know? Like, I can find the grocery store and the laundromat, but I have no idea where to go if I want to see a movie or grab dinner somewhere that isn't a chain restaurant. There's a good theater about 6 blocks north of here," I found myself saying before I could think better of it. They show a mix of new releases and older films. And if you want food, Romano's has the best Italian in the neighborhood. It's not fancy, but the portions are huge and everything's made fresh. Jake's face brightened. See, this is exactly what I need. A local guide. He paused, seeming to consider something, then added, maybe you could show me around sometime? I mean, if you're not too busy on your days off. The suggestion hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility that made my pulse quicken. Was he asking me out? Or was this just friendly conversation, the kind of thing new coworkers said to each other without any deeper meaning? I desperately wanted to say yes, but the words stuck in my throat as panic crept in around the edges. Maybe, I said finally, the word coming out more cautious than I'd intended. I mean, yeah, I could probably show you a few places. If Jake noticed my hesitation, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he just smiled and said, great. I'd really like that. The morning rush hit us at 7:15, and for the next 2 hours we were too busy to continue any personal conversation. But even in the chaos of steaming milk and calling out orders, I found myself hyper-aware of Jake's presence. The way he moved around the small workspace, always seeming to anticipate where I needed to be. How he handled difficult customers with patience and humor. The unconscious grace in his movements as he worked the espresso machine, his sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly strong forearms. During our brief lull around 9:30, as we both caught our breath and restocked supplies, Jake pulled a small notebook from his back pocket and tore out a page. He scribbled something quickly, then folded the paper and tucked it under my coffee cup, which I'd left sitting on the back counter. What's that? I asked, though my heart was already starting to race. Nothing important, he said with a grin that suggested otherwise. Just read it later. The note felt like it was burning a hole in my awareness for the rest of our shift. Every time I glanced at my coffee cup, I could see the corner of white paper peeking out underneath, and my imagination ran wild with what Jake might have written. Was it his phone number? An actual invitation to hang out? Something more personal that would confirm my growing suspicions about his interest in me? Or was I completely deluding myself, reading romantic intention into what was probably just a friendly gesture from someone who was naturally warm and outgoing with everyone? By the time our replacements arrived at 11 o'clock, I was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Jake seemed completely relaxed as he gathered his things and said goodbye, giving me that same easy smile that had become the highlight of my mornings. See you tomorrow, Owen. Thanks for the restaurant recommendation. I waited until he was completely gone before unfolding the note, my hands embarrassingly unsteady. The handwriting was neat but casual, the kind of penmanship that suggested someone who actually cared about being legible. Owen, thanks for making these early mornings something to look forward to. You're probably the first person I've met here who feels like a real friend. Also, that thing you do where you tap the espresso portafilter twice before locking it in? I've been trying to figure out if it's superstition or technique. Jake. I read it 3 times, parsing every word for hidden meaning. He called me a friend, which should have been disappointing but somehow wasn't. There was something about the way he'd written it, the careful thought that had gone into choosing his words, that felt more significant than casual workplace conversation. And the detail about the portafilter, such a small thing to notice, but it meant he'd been watching me work, paying attention to my habits and quirks. The realization that I'd been equally aware of his movements, his gestures, his way of humming under his breath when he was concentrating, hit me with uncomfortable clarity. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my wallet, telling myself I was just keeping it because it was nice to have confirmation that Jake enjoyed working with me. But as I walked home through the increasingly busy streets, I found myself already looking forward to tomorrow morning in a way that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with the possibility of another coffee, another conversation, maybe even another note. That evening, as I sat in my apartment trying to focus on a book I'd been meaning to finish for weeks, I kept thinking about Jake's comment about wanting a local guide. The way he looked at me when he'd suggested I show him around, like the idea genuinely excited him. The easy assumption that we would spend time together outside of work, that our connection extended beyond the confines of the cafe. I'd been so careful for so long to keep my work life and personal life completely separate, to maintain professional boundaries that would protect me from exactly this kind of emotional complication. But Jake made those boundaries feel arbitrary and unnecessary. When he talked to me, asked me questions, shared stories about his own life, it felt natural to respond in kind. The thought of spending an afternoon with him, showing him my favorite bookstore or the park where I sometimes went to read on weekends, sent a warm flutter through my chest that I was getting tired of trying to suppress. Maybe it would just be two friends exploring the city together. Maybe it would be something more. For the first time in months, maybe something more didn't seem terrifying. The next morning, Jake was waiting for me when I arrived, 2 coffee cups in hand, and that becoming familiar smile lighting up his face. "Morning, Owen. Ready for another day of caffeinating the masses?" As I took the cup he offered, our fingers brushing in what was becoming a daily ritual, I realized that whatever was happening between us, I was ready to stop fighting it quite so hard. The first note appears on a Tuesday morning, tucked under the lid of my coffee cup like a secret waiting to be discovered. I almost miss it entirely, focused as I am on the familiar ritual of checking the espresso machine and counting the register, but something makes me pause when I lift the cup. The paper is small, torn from what looks like a order pad, and Jake's handwriting sprawls across it in blue ink. "Mrs. Henderson definitely has at least 6 cats. I can smell them from here when she orders her decaf. Jay." I find myself smiling before I can stop myself, glancing over at Jake, who's busy arranging pastries in the display case with the kind of focused attention that makes his tongue stick out slightly between his lips. He doesn't look up, doesn't acknowledge the note at all, but there's something in the set of his shoulders that tells me he's aware of my reaction. I fold the paper carefully and slip it into my apron pocket, telling myself it's just a throwaway joke, nothing worth keeping, but my fingers keep finding it throughout the morning shift, smoothing the edges like a talisman. The next day brings another note, this one longer. "Noticed you always wipe down the steam wand exactly 3 times after each use. There's something oddly satisfying about watching you work. You make chaos look like choreography." Jay, this time I catch him watching me read it, and when our eyes meet across the narrow space behind the counter, he grins with such unguarded warmth that I have to look away before I do something stupid like grin back just as widely. By Thursday, I'm looking for the note before I even taste the coffee, lifting the lid with the kind of anticipation that makes my stomach flutter in ways I don't want to examine too closely. Today's message is shorter, but somehow more intimate. "Hope you slept better than you looked yesterday. You deserve good dreams." Jay, I must have looked as tired as I felt after lying awake most of the night thinking about blue ink and careful handwriting, but the fact that Jake noticed, that he cared enough to mention it, makes something warm unfurl in my chest. I start keeping the notes in a small wooden box on my nightstand, the same box where I used to keep my grandmother's old jewelry before she passed. It seems fitting somehow, storing these small treasures alongside the pearl earrings and tarnished silver bracelet that represent the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. Each night, I spread them out on my bedspread and read them again, analyzing every word choice, every loop of Jake's handwriting, searching for hidden meanings that might explain why my heart races every time I see that familiar blue ink. The notes become more frequent, more personal, like Jake is testing the boundaries of what he can say without crossing some invisible line. "Your laugh when Mrs. Peterson tried to order a latte with extra foam, but not too much foam, but definitely some foam, was the highlight of my entire week," reads one. Another simply says, "You hum when you're concentrating. It's the most peaceful sound in the world." Each message feels like a small confession, a way of saying I see you. I notice you. You matter to me in ways that go beyond our professional relationship. I find myself changing my behavior without meaning to, staying later to help with closing tasks I normally rush through, timing my breaks to coincide with Jake's, creating opportunities for the kind of casual conversation that might lead to something deeper. When he mentions loving old movies, I spend an entire evening researching classic films so I can contribute intelligently to the discussion. When he talks about missing the hiking trails back home, I find myself suggesting local spots I've never actually visited, then staying up until midnight reading reviews and trail maps so I won't be caught in the lie. The realization hits me on a Friday morning while I'm reading Jake's latest note. 3 weeks working together, and I still look forward to seeing you every single day. That's not normal for me. You're not normal for me, Owen. Jay, the words blur as I read them a second time, then a third, and suddenly I can't pretend anymore that this is just friendship, just casual workplace camaraderie. The flutter in my stomach isn't nervousness about a new coworker, and the way I find excuses to stand closer to Jake isn't about improving our workflow efficiency. I'm attracted to him. More than attracted, I'm falling for him in the desperate, terrifying way that makes every love song on the radio sound like it was written specifically for my situation. The admission makes me feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, wind whipping around me, nothing but empty air and the possibility of falling spread out below. For weeks I've been telling myself that Jake's attention is just friendliness, that the notes are just casual observations, that the way he looks at me is just professional courtesy. But reading his words, seeing the vulnerability in his admission that I'm different for him, makes it impossible to maintain the fiction. The worst part is that I don't know what Jake's different means. Different could mean anything, different because I'm a good coworker, different because I'm the first person he's met since moving to the city, different because he's noticed something about me that marks me as obviously, undeniably gay. The thought makes my hands shake as I fold the note and add it to my apron pocket, where it joins the growing collection of small papers that feel like they're burning a hole through the fabric. I spend the rest of the shift hyper-aware of everything Jake does, analyzing his behavior for signs of romantic interest while simultaneously terrified that I'm reading too much into innocent gestures. When he brushes my shoulder while reaching for coffee filters, I feel the touch like an electric shock, but maybe he's just being efficient in our small workspace. When he compliments the way I handled a difficult customer, praising my patience and professionalism, I wonder if he's really talking about something else entirely, or if I'm projecting my own desperate hopes onto ordinary workplace feedback. The uncertainty is killing me. I've never been in this position before, never had to wonder if someone might return my feelings, because I've never allowed myself to develop feelings for anyone. The few times I've been attracted to men, I've immediately shut down the emotion, changing my schedule or finding excuses to avoid the person until the feeling faded. But Jake is different. He's unavoidable, sitting right there every morning with his carefully prepared coffee and his thoughtful notes, making it impossible to retreat into my usual patterns of denial and avoidance. That night, I spread all the notes out on my bed and read them chronologically, looking for patterns, for evidence of growing intimacy or romantic undertones. The progression is clear when I see them all together. Jake's messages have become more personal, more revealing, more affectionate. But they're also carefully worded, nothing that couldn't be explained away as friendship if I ever confronted him about their meaning. He's protecting himself, I realize, the same way I've been protecting myself, leaving room for retreat if his feelings aren't reciprocated. The thought that Jake might be as scared and uncertain as I am feels both comforting and terrifying. If he's attracted to men, if he's specifically attracted to me, then the notes take on an entirely different meaning. But if I'm wrong, if I'm reading romantic interest into what's actually just kindness from a straight man who doesn't realize the effect he's having on me, then acting on my feelings could destroy the best friendship I've ever had. I lie awake that night staring at the ceiling, Jake's latest note clutched in my hand like a prayer. "You're not normal for me, Owen." The words replay in my mind on an endless loop, and I find myself parsing every syllable for hidden meaning. What isn't normal? The way he looks forward to seeing me? The way he pays attention to my habits and quirks? The way he takes time to write these notes that no one else sees, these small intimate communications that exist just between us? By Saturday morning I'm exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep and too much caffeine, but I arrive at work early anyway, desperate to see Jake's face when he gives me the coffee, searching for clues in his expression about what he's feeling. He's already there when I arrive, which isn't unusual, but something about his demeanor seems different, more nervous, more uncertain than his usual easy confidence. "Morning," he says, handing me the cup with hands that seem less steady than usual. "Hope you like it." I lift the lid immediately, not bothering to hide my eagerness for today's note, and find a message that makes my breath catch. "I keep writing these notes because I don't know how else to tell you that working with you is the best part of my day. Not just the job, not just the coffee shop, but specifically you. I hope that doesn't make things weird between us. Jay." My hands are shaking as I read it a second time, and when I look up, Jake is watching me with an expression I can't quite decipher. There's hope there, and fear, and something that might be the same desperate longing I feel every time I see his handwriting on these small pieces of paper. "It doesn't make things weird," I say quietly, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what I'm feeling. "It makes things better." The smile that spreads across Jake's face is like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise, and I realize that I'm standing at the edge of something that could change everything. The notes have become a language between us, a way of saying things we're not quite brave enough to say out loud, and I'm finally ready to learn how to speak it fluently. The rest of the morning passes in a blur of meaningful glances and casual touches that feel anything but casual. When Jake hands me supplies, his fingers linger against mine just a moment longer than necessary. When I reach around him to grab something from a high shelf, I'm acutely aware of the warmth of his body, the way he doesn't step away even when I'm standing closer than workplace etiquette probably dictates. During our lunch break, I find myself studying his profile as he talks about his weekend plans, the way his eyes light up when he mentions wanting to explore more of the city. The way he keeps glancing at me like he's trying to work up the courage to say something important. I want to tell him that I'd love to show him around, that I've been researching hiking trails and local restaurants just in case he ever wants company, but the words stick in my throat like they always do when I'm on the verge of revealing too much. Instead, I listen to him talk about missing the mountains back home, about feeling disconnected in a new city where he doesn't know anyone, and I file away every detail for future reference. When he mentions loving Sunday morning walks but feeling strange about going alone, I almost offer to join him, but fear holds me back. What if he's just being polite? What if he didn't mean for his comments to sound like an invitation? What if I'm misreading everything and making a fool of myself? The afternoon brings another rush of customers, and I lose myself in the familiar rhythm of taking orders and making drinks, but I'm constantly aware of Jake moving beside me. The way we've developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and needs. When I'm running low on milk, he's already reaching for a fresh container. When he needs more cups, I'm already restocking his station. It's like we're dancing, I think, a complicated choreography that we've somehow mastered without ever discussing the steps. As closing time approaches, I find myself reluctant to leave, drawing out the cleaning tasks and inventory checks to extend our time together. Jake seems to be doing the same thing, wiping down surfaces that are already clean, reorganizing supplies that don't need reorganizing. We're both stalling, I realize, neither of us wanting to break the spell of intimacy that the notes have created between us. Finally, when there's nothing left to clean and the register has been counted twice, we have no choice but to head to the back room for our coats and bags. Jake is quiet as we gather our things, but there's an energy around him that suggests he's building up to something, working up the courage to say whatever he's been thinking about all day. Owen, he says as we're walking toward the door, and something in his tone makes me stop and turn to face him. I want you to know that these notes, they're not just random observations. They're not just me being friendly. My heart is pounding so hard I'm sure he can hear it, but I manage to nod and wait for him to continue. I've never done anything like this before, he admits, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that's become endearingly familiar. Left notes for someone? I mean, paid this much attention to someone's habits and preferences. But there's something about you that makes me want to try new things. The vulnerability in his voice makes my chest tight with emotion, and I realize that we're standing at the threshold of something that could change both of our lives. The notes have been leading us here, to this moment of potential honesty, and I'm finally ready to stop being afraid of what might happen if I let myself fall. The morning after Jake's note about our connection meaning something deeper, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual, actually caring about how my hair looked. The realization hit me like a slap. I was getting ready for Jake. Not for work, not for the customers, but specifically for him. When had that happened? When had my entire morning routine started revolving around the possibility of seeing him smile when I walked through the cafe doors? I caught myself humming in the shower, and the sound was so foreign that I actually stopped mid-note. When was the last time I'd hummed? When was the last time I'd felt this lightness in my chest, this anticipation that made my steps quicker on the walk to work? The answer scared me because it was never. I'd never felt like this about anyone, and the implications of that realization made my stomach twist with equal parts excitement and terror. Jake was already there when I arrived, and his face lit up the moment he saw me. "Morning," he said, and there was something in his voice, warmth, maybe relief, that made me wonder if he'd been as eager to see me as I'd been to see him. He handed me my coffee, and our fingers brushed during the exchange. The contact lasted maybe half a second longer than necessary, and I found myself analyzing it obsessively even as I tried to focus on his words. "Sleep okay?" he asked, and I nodded, though the truth was I'd barely slept at all. I'd spent most of the night rereading his notes, trying to decode every word choice, every pen stroke, looking for hidden meanings that might confirm what I desperately hoped he was feeling. We fell into our usual rhythm, preparing for the morning rush. But there was an electricity in the air that hadn't been there before. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment when we moved around each other in the small space behind the counter felt charged with possibility. I was hyper-aware of him in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. The way he rolled up his sleeves, the concentrated expression he got when steaming milk, the soft sound he made when he laughed at something I said. It was during the brief lull between the breakfast rush and the mid-morning crowd that everything changed. I was wiping down tables when I heard the bell above the door chime, and I looked up to see Parker walking in. My blood went cold. Parker was my oldest friend, the one person who knew me well enough to see through any facade I might try to maintain. He was also relentlessly observant and had been commenting for weeks about my improved mood, my sudden interest in buying new clothes, the way I'd started actually styling my hair instead of just running my fingers through it. I'd been deflecting his questions, but seeing him here, now, with Jake just a few feet away, made panic rise in my throat. "Owen," Parker called out, his face breaking into a grin. "Thought I'd stop by and see you in your natural habitat. Plus, I'm dying for decent coffee." I forced a smile, but I could feel Jake's attention shift our way. "Hey, Parker, what can I get you?" "Surprise me," Parker said, then leaned against the counter in that casual way he had when he was settling in for a conversation. "You look good, man. Like, really good. There's something different about you lately." I felt heat creep up my neck. "Just been sleeping better, I guess." Parker's eyes were already scanning the space behind me, taking in Jake's presence with the laser focus of someone who'd made it his mission to figure out what had changed in my life. I watched his expression shift as he observed Jake preparing his drink, noting the easy familiarity between us, the way Jake glanced over with a small smile when he heard Parker mention how different I seemed. "So this is where the magic happens," Parker continued, but his tone had changed slightly. He was in investigative mode now, which meant trouble. Must be nice having good company during those early shifts. Before I could respond, Jake approached with Parker's coffee. "You must be one of Owen's friends," he said with that warm smile that usually made my day but now made me want to hide. "I'm Jake." "Parker," my friend replied, shaking Jake's hand while his eyes flicked between us. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. "Owen's told me so much about you." The lie hung in the air, and I felt my face burn. I hadn't told Parker anything about Jake, not his name, not that he existed, nothing. But Parker's pointed look made it clear he was fishing, trying to gauge Jake's reaction to see how much Jake thought I'd shared. Jake's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across his features. "Really? That's nice to hear." The awkwardness was suffocating. I could feel Jake's eyes on me, could sense his confusion about why I'd apparently been talking about him to my friends when I'd never mentioned having close friends to him. Parker, meanwhile, was watching our interaction with the intensity of a scientist observing a fascinating experiment. "Owen's been in such a good mood lately," Parker continued, "and I wanted to disappear. Like, dramatically better. More energy, actually caring about how he looks, humming around the apartment. I kept asking him if he was seeing someone, but he's been pretty secretive about it." The words hit like physical blows. I saw Jake's expression change, saw the moment he registered the implications of what Parker was saying. The confusion in his eyes shifted to something else. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Here was confirmation that I'd been talking about him, thinking about him enough that it had changed my entire demeanor, but apparently not enough to actually mention him to the people in my life. "I should get back to work," I said quickly, my voice coming out too loud, too sharp. "Parker, enjoy your coffee." I turned away before either of them could respond, busying myself with unnecessary tasks behind the counter. I could hear them exchanging a few more pleasantries, but their voices sounded distant, muffled by the roar of blood in my ears. When Parker finally left, calling out a goodbye that I barely acknowledged, the silence that settled over the cafe felt oppressive. Jake didn't say anything for a long time. We worked around each other, but the easy comfort that had developed between us over the past weeks was gone, replaced by a tension that made every movement feel awkward. I could feel him glancing at me, could sense his confusion and hurt, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. Finally, during another lull, he spoke. "So that was interesting." I kept my focus on the espresso machine I was cleaning for the third time. "Parker likes to talk. He seems to think you've been talking too." Jake's voice was careful, controlled. "About me, specifically." The cleaning rag in my hands was getting more aggressive attention than it deserved. He reads too much into things. Does he? Jake moved closer, and I could feel him studying my profile. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like your mood has improved so much that your friends have noticed. And he seemed pretty convinced that improvement was connected to someone you're seeing. The words hung between us, a challenge and a question wrapped together. I could feel the weight of Jake's expectations, could sense him waiting for me to acknowledge what Parker had implied, to admit that yes, he was the reason for my better mood, my increased attention to my appearance, my general shift towards something resembling happiness. But panic had its claws in me now. All I could think about was Parker's knowing look, his obvious delight at having figured out my secret. How long before he started asking more direct questions? How long before other people started noticing the way I looked at Jake, the way my whole demeanor changed when he was around? I think your friend got the wrong impression, I said finally, my voice flat. We're coworkers. That's all. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they were out now, hanging in the air like a barrier I'd just erected between us. I risked a glance at Jake's face and immediately regretted it. The hurt there was unmistakable, followed quickly by something that looked like embarrassment. Right, he said quietly. Coworkers. The rest of our shift passed in awkward silence. Jake stopped making casual conversation, stopped finding excuses to work near me, stopped catching my eye across the counter with those small smiles that had become so precious to me. When customers came in, we were professional and efficient, but the warmth that had developed between us was gone, replaced by a cold politeness that felt worse than if he'd been openly angry. I told myself I was protecting us both, protecting what we had built, but even as I thought it, I knew I was lying. I was protecting myself, and in doing so, I was destroying the best thing that had happened to me in years. When our shift ended, Jake gathered his things quickly, efficiently. Usually, we lingered, finding reasons to extend our time together, but today he seemed eager to leave. I watched him check his phone, organize his bag, put on his jacket, all without looking in my direction. Jake, I called out as he headed for the door, though I had no idea what I planned to say. He paused, turned back with an expression that was carefully neutral. Yeah. Standing there, looking at him, I could see the guardedness that had replaced his usual openness. In trying to protect myself from Parker's scrutiny, from the possibility that people might figure out how I felt, I had hurt someone who had been nothing but kind to me, nothing but genuine in his attention and care. Never mind, I said, because I was still too scared, still too caught up in my own panic to fix what I'd broken. See you tomorrow. He nodded once, sharp and final. See you tomorrow. After he left, I sat alone in the empty cafe, surrounded by the lingering scent of coffee and the weight of my own cowardice. I pulled out my phone and found a text from Parker. So when are you going to introduce me properly to your boyfriend? He seems nice. The casual assumption in his message made my stomach churn. How obvious had it been? How clearly had my feelings been written on my face for Parker to pick up on them so quickly? And if Parker could see it after one brief interaction, how many other people had noticed? How long before everyone at work was talking about it, speculating about us, making assumptions I wasn't ready to face? But even as the panic spiraled through me, another part of my mind was replaying Jake's expression when I dismissed our connection as nothing more than coworkers. The flash of hurt, followed by withdrawal, the way he'd shut down so completely that it felt like losing something I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. I thought about all his notes, saved in a box in my bedroom, each one a small gesture of connection and care. I thought about the way he brought me coffee every morning, the way he remembered details about my life, the way he'd said our friendship meant something deeper than casual workplace pleasantries. And I'd thrown it all back in his face because I was too terrified of other people's opinions to acknowledge what was happening between us. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. Parker's knowing smile, Jake's confusion and hurt, the awful silence that had stretched between us for the rest of our shift. I'd spent so much time analyzing Jake's notes, looking for signs that he might feel something for me, and then when those feelings had been virtually confirmed by an outside observer, I'd panicked and denied everything. The worst part was knowing that I'd have to face him again tomorrow, that we'd have to work together with this new awkwardness between us. Would he still bring me coffee? Would he still leave notes? Or had my reaction today killed whatever had been growing between us before it had a chance to fully bloom? I reached for the box of notes on my nightstand, pulling out the most recent one about our connection, meaning something deeper. Reading it now, after what had happened today, felt like looking at evidence of something I destroyed through my own fear. Jake had been reaching out, being vulnerable, sharing his feelings in the safest way he knew how, and I'd responded by slamming the door in his face the moment someone else noticed what was happening. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and filled with dreams where I kept trying to explain myself to Jake, kept trying to take back what I'd said, but every time I opened my mouth, the words came out wrong, making things worse instead of better. I woke up with the certainty that I'd ruined everything, and the knowledge that I had no idea how to fix it. The thought of facing Jake, of seeing that careful politeness replace the warmth that had become so important to me, made me want to call in sick. But hiding wouldn't solve anything, and I owed him better than that, even if I'd already proven I was too much of a coward to give him what he deserved. The morning routine that had become so precious to me now felt like preparing for execution. Every step toward work was heavy with dread, weighed down by the knowledge that I'd let my fear destroy something beautiful before it had even had a chance to fully exist. The next morning arrives like a judgment day I'm not ready to face. I drag myself out of bed after another sleepless night, my eyes burning from staring at the ceiling and replaying yesterday's disaster on an endless loop. The coffee maker gurgles to life in my kitchen, but even the familiar ritual of preparing for work feels hollow now. Everything reminds me of Jake, the way he teased me about my precise measuring of coffee grounds, how he'd learned exactly how I like my morning cup, the easy laughter we'd share before the cafe filled with customers. Now all of that feels like it belongs to someone else's life, someone braver than me. The walk to work stretches longer than usual, each step heavy with dread. I keep rehearsing conversations in my head, trying to find words that might undo the damage I've done, but they all sound pathetic and inadequate. How do you apologize for throwing someone's kindness back in their face? How do you explain that your cruelty came from terror, not indifference? The morning air bites at my cheeks, but the cold is nothing compared to the ice that's settled in my chest since I saw the hurt in Jake's eyes yesterday. When I round the corner to the cafe, I spot Jake's familiar silhouette through the window, already inside preparing for opening. My stomach lurches. Part of me wants to keep walking, to call in sick and postpone this inevitable confrontation, but I force my feet to carry me to the door. I can't avoid him forever, and every day I wait will only make things worse. The bell chimes as I enter, and Jake looks up from where he's arranging pastries in the display case. Our eyes meet for a split second before he quickly looks away, his expression carefully neutral. "Morning," he says, his voice polite but distant. It's the same tone he uses with difficult customers, professional and guarded. The easy warmth that used to color his greetings is completely gone, replaced by this awful formality that makes my chest tight with regret. "Morning," I manage to reply, my own voice coming out rougher than intended. I want to say more, to apologize, to explain, but the words stick in my throat. Jake's already turned back to his work, moving with efficient precision that tells me he's not interested in conversation. The silence between us feels like a physical thing, heavy and uncomfortable, nothing like the comfortable quiet we used to share while setting up for the day. I go through the motions of opening prep, checking the espresso machine, refilling the milk steamer, arranging cups with mechanical precision. Every movement feels forced and unnatural, like I'm performing a role I've forgotten how to play. Usually, Jake and I work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, sharing small jokes and observations that make the morning tasks fly by. Now we move around each other like polite strangers, careful not to get too close, careful not to let our hands brush when we reach for the same supplies. The morning rush begins, and I throw myself into the familiar rhythm of taking orders and making drinks. It's easier when we're busy because the constant stream of customers provides a buffer between us, a legitimate reason not to talk beyond the necessary coordination of our work. But even in the chaos of the breakfast crowd, I'm hyper-aware of Jake's presence, the careful way he avoids looking at me directly, how he's lost the unconscious smile he used to wear while working. During a brief lull between rushes, I catch sight of something that makes my heart stop. There, tucked under the register where Jake usually leaves my morning notes, is a small folded piece of paper. For a moment, I can't breathe. After yesterday's disaster, after the cold way I treated him, he still left me a note. My hand shakes slightly as I reach for it, glancing over to make sure Jake's occupied with restocking before I unfold the familiar handwriting. The words hit me like a physical blow, each line more devastating than the last. Jake's handwriting, usually confident and flowing, looks uncertain, some letters pressed darker than others as if he'd hesitated while writing. Owen, it begins, and even seeing my name in his careful script makes my throat tight. I've been trying to figure out what I did wrong yesterday. I keep replaying our conversation with your friend, wondering if I overstepped somehow or made you uncomfortable. I know we haven't known each other very long, but I thought we had become friends. Good friends, even. I have to pause reading, the paper trembling in my hands. The quiet hurt in his words is worse than if he'd been angry. Anger I could handle, could deflect or argue against. But this vulnerability, this genuine confusion and self-doubt, cuts straight through every defense I have. I don't know if I misread the situation, the note continues, but these past few weeks working with you have been the best part of my day. Not just because you're good at what you do, though you are, but because you make me laugh. You listen when I talk about random things. You remember details about my life that I didn't even realize I'd shared. I haven't had that kind of connection with someone in a long time, and I guess I assumed you felt the same way. My vision blurs as I read on, each word a reminder of how badly I've screwed this up. Jake goes on to apologize for whatever he thinks he did wrong, promising to give me space if that's what I need, but asking if we can at least maintain a professional working relationship without the awkwardness. He signs it simply with his name, no joke or personal touch like his previous notes. It's the most heartbreaking thing I've ever read. I fold the note carefully and slip it into my pocket, my mind racing. Jake thinks he did something wrong. He's blaming himself for my cruel reaction, trying to figure out what he could have done differently. The thought makes me sick with shame. Here's this incredible person who's shown me nothing but kindness, and I've let him believe that my panic and fear are somehow his fault. The rest of the shift passes in a blur of guilt and mounting determination. Every time I look at Jake, every time I see the careful way he's guarding himself now, I feel the weight of what I've lost. But more than that, I feel the urgent need to fix this, to find the courage I couldn't muster yesterday. Jake deserves better than my cowardice. He deserves honesty, even if it terrifies me. As closing time approaches, an idea begins to form. Jake left himself vulnerable in that note, shared his feelings and confusion despite the risk of further rejection. The least I can do is match that courage. For the first time since this nightmare began, I have something resembling a plan. It's terrifying and could backfire spectacularly, but doing nothing guarantees I'll lose him completely. We clean up in the same stilted silence that's plagued us all day, but now I'm too focused on what I need to do to let it paralyze me. After Jake leaves with a polite goodbye that barely qualifies as acknowledgement, I sit at one of the small tables in our empty cafe and pull out a piece of paper. My hands are shaking, but I force myself to pick up a pen. Writing has never been my strong suit, and I stare at the blank page for what feels like hours before I manage to write Jake at the top. The simple act of writing his name sends a wave of anxiety through me, but I push forward. If he can be vulnerable, so can I. If he can risk his feelings on a piece of paper, I can do the same. I'm the one who should be apologizing, I write, the words feeling strange and inadequate. You didn't do anything wrong yesterday. Not even close. What happened when Parker showed up, the way I acted afterward, that was all me being an idiot and a coward. I pause, rereading the lines, knowing I need to go deeper. Surface apologies won't fix this. Jake deserves the truth, even if it scares me more than anything I've ever done. The truth is, these past few weeks have been the best part of my day too. Not just the best part, sometimes they feel like the only part that matters. I look forward to seeing you in ways that have nothing to do with work and everything to do with who you are. Your stupid jokes about the regular customers, the way you actually listen when I complain about things, how you somehow make everything feel lighter just by being there. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely focus on the words I'm writing, but I force myself to continue. When Parker showed up and I saw him watching me with you, I panicked. Not because of anything you did, but because I was terrified he might see what I've been trying so hard not to admit to myself. That what I feel for you goes way beyond friendship or being coworkers. The words are out now, written in my messy handwriting on this piece of paper, and there's no taking them back. I stare at what I've written, hardly believing I've actually done it. For someone who's spent years hiding from his feelings, Seeing them spelled out so clearly is both liberating and absolutely terrifying. But I'm not done. Jake's note was honest about his hurt and confusion, so I owe him the same level of honesty about mine. I've never been good at this stuff. I continue writing. I've spent so long convincing myself that wanting what I want makes me wrong or broken that I don't know how to handle it when someone like you comes along and makes me feel normal. Human, even. When Parker noticed something between us, I freaked out and hurt you to protect myself. It was selfish and cruel, and I'm sorry. I set the pen down for a moment, my hand cramping from gripping it too tightly. This is harder than I expected, laying myself bare like this, but also strangely freeing. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely honest about my feelings, not hiding behind jokes or deflection or careful distance. I don't know if you can forgive me for yesterday, I write, picking up the pen again. I don't know if I even deserve it. But I need you to know that every morning coffee, every note you've left me, every moment we've shared has meant more to me than I knew how to handle. You didn't misread anything. If anything, you were seeing me more clearly than I was seeing myself. The admission feels like stepping off a cliff, but there's no point in holding back now. I kept all your notes, I write, the confession making my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I read them at home, and they make me smile in ways I didn't know I could. When you started bringing me coffee, I started looking forward to work for the first time in years. Not because of the job, but because it meant I got to see you. I'm running out of paper and courage in equal measure, but I need to finish this. I understand if you can't forgive me for how I acted. I understand if you need to keep things professional from now on. But I couldn't let you think that any of this was your fault. You've been nothing but kind and funny and genuine, and you deserve so much better than someone who's too scared to appreciate what he has until he's already lost it. I sign my name at the bottom, my signature looking shaky and uncertain. The note sits on the table in front of me, all my secrets and fears and hopes condensed into a few paragraphs of messy handwriting. It's the most honest I've ever been with another person, and definitely the most honest I've ever been with myself. Folding the paper feels like sealing my fate. I tuck it under the register where Jake left his note for me this morning, my hands still trembling slightly. Tomorrow morning, he'll find it and read my confession, and then I'll know whether my honesty came too late or if there's still a chance to salvage what I nearly destroyed. The walk home feels different than this morning's dread-filled journey to work. I'm still scared, maybe more scared than I've ever been, but it's a cleaner fear now. Instead of the sick anxiety of knowing I'm hiding from the truth, this is the sharp terror of having put everything on the line. I've done the hardest thing I've ever done, and now all I can do is wait. Back in my apartment, I try to distract myself with television and dinner preparations, but my mind keeps drifting back to that folded piece of paper sitting under the register. By now, it's too late to go back and retrieve it, to chicken out and return to the safe misery of keeping my feelings locked away. For better or worse, I've made my choice. Sleep doesn't come easily, but when it finally does, it's deeper and more peaceful than the restless tossing I've endured for the past few nights. Somewhere in my dreams, Jake is reading my note, and instead of the rejection I fear, he's smiling the same warm smile he used to give me every morning. It's probably just wishful thinking, but for now, it's enough to let me rest. I slept maybe 2 hours that night, my mind replaying every word I'd written in that note, second-guessing every vulnerable admission I'd made. By 4:30 in the morning, I gave up pretending I could rest and decided to head to the cafe early. The streets were empty except for the occasional delivery truck, and the familiar weight of anxiety sat heavy in my chest as I walked the 6 blocks through the pre-dawn darkness. My plan was simple: slip the note under Jake's usual stack of prep materials before he arrived, then pretend nothing had changed until he had a chance to read it. Maybe if I acted normal enough, I could buy myself a few hours before facing whatever came next. The coward's approach, but it was all I could manage. The cafe sat dark and quiet when I arrived, exactly as I'd expected. I fumbled with my keys for a moment, my hand shaking slightly from nerves and too much caffeine from the night before. The familiar smell of coffee beans and cleaning supplies hit me as I stepped inside, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. This place had become my sanctuary over the past few months, largely because of Jake, and being here alone gave me a moment to center myself. I flicked on just the backlights, leaving the main dining area dim, and pulled the folded note from my pocket. It looked so small and insignificant, just a piece of paper torn from my notebook, but it contained more truth than I'd ever shared with another person. My heart hammered as I walked toward the prep station where Jake always set up his morning routine. "You're early today." I nearly jumped out of my skin, spinning around to find Jake emerging from the back office, already wearing his apron. He looked as tired as I felt, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. The sight of him made my chest tighten with a mixture of longing and panic. "I couldn't sleep," I managed to say, quickly shoving the note back into my pocket. "Figured I'd get a head start on prep." Jake nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Yeah, me neither. I've been here since 4, actually. Just sitting in the office, thinking." The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. The early morning quiet that usually felt peaceful now seemed charged with tension. I could hear the distant hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional car passing on the street outside, but mostly I was aware of Jake's presence, the way he was studying me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Owen," he said finally, his voice soft but determined. "Can we talk? Before everyone else gets here." My mouth went dry. The note in my pocket felt like it was burning against my leg, and I wondered if I could somehow slip it to him without having to face this conversation head-on. But looking at Jake's tired eyes, seeing the same exhaustion and uncertainty I'd been carrying, I realized that hiding behind written words wasn't fair to either of us anymore. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We should talk." Jake gestured toward the small table in the back corner where we sometimes sat during breaks. It felt surreal, walking over there together in the dim lighting with the cafe closed around us. This was the same space where we worked side by side every day, where we'd shared countless easy conversations, but everything felt different now. The air between us practically hummed with unspoken words. We sat across from each other, and I found myself focusing on Jake's hands where they rested on the table. Those hands that had written me dozens of notes, that brushed against mine when we worked together, that had become so familiar I could probably draw them from memory. "I've been thinking about what happened the other day," Jake began, his voice careful and measured. "When your friend came by. The way you just shut down. And I keep trying to figure out what I did wrong, but I can't make sense of it." The pain in his voice made my chest ache. Here he was, still blaming himself for my moment of panic, still trying to take responsibility for my fears. I pulled the note from my pocket and set it on the table between us, my hand trembling slightly. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "I wrote this for you. It explains, well, it explains everything, I think. But maybe I should just say it instead of hiding behind paper." Jake's gaze flicked to the folded note, then back to my face. "Owen, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," I interrupted, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "You've been honest with me from the beginning. All those notes, all those conversations, the way you see me. I've been too scared to be honest back, and that's not fair to you." I took a shaky breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Every instinct told me to retreat, to make up some excuse and pretend this conversation wasn't happening. But Jake was looking at me with such patience and understanding that I found the courage to continue. "The truth is, your notes became the best part of my day," I said, the words tumbling out faster now. "Not just because they were funny or sweet, but because they were from you. I've saved every single one. I read them at home, and I've been looking forward to work every day for the first time in my life, and it's not because I suddenly love making lattes." Jake's expression shifted, something like hope flickering in his eyes, but he stayed quiet, letting me find my words. "When Parker showed up the other day and saw us together, saw how we were with each other, I panicked," I continued. Not because I don't feel something for you, but because I've never felt this way about anyone before, especially not another man, and the idea of people knowing, of having to explain or defend it." I trailed off, running a hand through my hair. "I got scared and I took it out on you, and I'm so sorry." The silence that followed felt endless. Jake was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for his response. Part of me wanted to grab the note and run, to pretend this conversation had never happened. "Owen," Jake said finally, his voice soft. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "When you say you've never felt this way about anyone before, do you mean you've never felt this way about a man? Or you've never felt this way about anyone at all?" The question caught me off guard with its gentleness. Jake wasn't pushing or demanding anything. He was just trying to understand. And somehow that made it easier to be honest. Anyone at all, I admitted. I mean, I've tried dating women, figured that's what I was supposed to do. But it never felt right. I always thought there was something wrong with me, that I just wasn't capable of feeling what other people felt. Until you started working here. Jake's face lit up with a smile so bright it made my heart skip. Owen, there's nothing wrong with you. And for what it's worth, I was hoping. I mean, every note I wrote, every coffee I brought you, it was because I was hoping you might feel the same way I do. I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. The same way you do? I've had feelings for you since my second week here, Jake said, his cheeks flushing slightly. The way you concentrate when you're working, the little smile you get when you're amused by something, the way you actually listen when people talk to you. I kept leaving you those notes because I couldn't figure out how else to show you that I cared without risking everything if I was wrong about what I was sensing between us. The relief that washed over me was so intense I felt dizzy. All this time, all these weeks of wondering and worrying and convincing myself I was imagining things. Jake had been feeling the same uncertainty, the same hope. You weren't wrong, I said, my voice stronger now. I just didn't know how to handle it. I've spent so much time hiding from myself that I didn't know how to stop hiding from you. Jake reached across the table, covering my hand with his. The contact sent a warm jolt through me, but this time I didn't pull away. His skin was warm and slightly rough from work, and the simple touch felt like the most natural thing in the world. We don't have to figure everything out right now, he said. But I'm glad you told me. I'm glad we're finally being honest with each other. I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at his face. In the dim lighting of the early morning cafe, with the rest of the world still asleep outside, it felt like we existed in our own private bubble of possibility. I'm terrified, I admitted. About what this means, about what people will think, about everything changing. Things are already changing, Jake said gently. They have been since the day we met. The only question is whether we let them change in a good way or keep fighting it. He was right, and I knew it. The past few months had already transformed my life in ways I couldn't undo. I was happier, more engaged with the world around me, more like the person I'd always wanted to be but never knew how to become. And all of that was because of Jake. I don't want to keep fighting it, I said, turning my hand over so our palms pressed together. I'm tired of being afraid of the best thing that's ever happened to me. Jake's smile was radiant. So what do we do now? I glanced at the clock on the wall and realized our coworkers would start arriving in less than an hour. Soon this quiet, intimate space would be filled with the usual chaos of the morning rush. But for now, it was just us, finally honest with each other after weeks of dancing around the truth. Now we figure it out together, I said. One day at a time. Jake squeezed my hand, and I felt something inside me settle into place, like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. The note still sat folded on the table between us, unopened but no longer necessary. We'd found our words without it. The fear was still there. I knew it would take time to fully accept this new part of myself, to stop worrying about other people's reactions. But sitting there with Jake's hand in mine, watching the sky begin to lighten outside the cafe windows, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the possibility of being truly, completely myself with another person. And for the first time in my life, that possibility felt worth the risk. The next morning felt different from the moment Owen opened his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel that familiar knot in his stomach. Instead, there was something lighter there, something that felt suspiciously like hope. As he got ready for work, he caught himself smiling in the bathroom mirror and didn't try to stop it. When he arrived at the cafe, Jake was already there, setting up the espresso machine with that focused concentration Owen had grown to love. The sight of him made Owen's heart do that familiar skip, but now instead of panic, he felt warmth spread through his chest. "Morning," Jake said, looking up with a smile that seemed brighter than usual. "Morning," Owen replied, and the word felt charged with new meaning. They worked through their opening routine with an easy rhythm they'd developed over the past months, but now there was an undercurrent of electricity between them. Every time their hands brushed reaching for supplies, every shared glance across the counter, every quiet laugh felt significant in a way that made Owen's pulse quicken. It wasn't until their first break that Jake pulled out a small folded paper from his apron pocket. "I wrote this before I got here," he said, offering it to Owen with slightly nervous fingers. "Old habits, I guess." Owen unfolded the note, his heart racing as he read Jake's familiar handwriting. I keep wanting to pinch myself to make sure yesterday morning actually happened. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth. I can't wait to see where this goes. Jay. Owen looked up to find Jake watching him with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and vulnerable. Without overthinking it, Owen reached into his own pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Seems like we had the same idea, he said. Jake's face lit up as he opened Owen's note. I slept better last night than I have in months. Turns out honesty is a pretty good cure for insomnia. Looking forward to more morning conversations with you. Oh. So we're still doing this? Jake asked, holding up his note. I hope so, Owen said. Though maybe now they can be a little more direct. Jake's smile widened. I like that. The morning rush began shortly after, and Owen found himself stealing glances at Jake throughout their shift. There was something magical about sharing this secret in plain sight, about having Jake catch his eye and smile knowingly while they served their regular customers. Mrs. Henderson from the law office commented on how cheerful they both seemed, and Owen felt his cheeks warm as Jake winked at him over her head. During their lunch break, they sat together at the small table in the back room where they'd had so many conversations before. But this time, when Jake's knee brushed against his under the table, Owen didn't pull away. Can I ask you something? Jake said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. Anything. When did you know? About me, I mean. That I might be interested. Owen considered the question, thinking back over the past few months. Honestly, part of me hoped from the beginning, but I kept talking myself out of it. I think I really knew when you started asking about my life outside of work. The way you listened, like you actually cared about the answer. Jake nodded. I did care. I still do. I wanted to know everything about you. What about you? Owen asked. When did you know about me? The first time I saw you laugh, Jake said without hesitation. Really laugh, not just the polite chuckle you give customers. You were reading something on your phone, and you just lit up. I knew I wanted to be the reason you looked like that. Owen felt heat creep up his neck. You've been the reason a lot more often than you probably realize. They were interrupted by the afternoon shift arriving, which meant their workday was coming to an end. As they gathered their things, Owen felt a flutter of uncertainty. They'd figured out how they felt about each other, but they hadn't talked about what came next. Jake seemed to sense his hesitation. Owen, he said quietly, would you maybe want to grab dinner? Somewhere that's not here. The question was simple, but Owen understood the weight of it. Their first real date. Their first step into whatever this was becoming. I'd love that, Owen said. As they walked out of the cafe together, Owen felt like he was seeing the street with new eyes. The late afternoon sunlight seemed warmer, the sounds of the city more musical. When Jake's hand brushed against his as they walked, Owen made a decision and laced their fingers together. Jake's surprised smile was worth every moment of fear Owen had worked through to get here. So, Jake said as they reached the corner where they usually parted ways, same time tomorrow morning? Wouldn't miss it, Owen replied. Though I have a feeling our note writing might get a little more interesting. Jake laughed, and the sound went straight to Owen's heart. I'm counting on it. As Owen watched Jake head toward the subway, he pulled out his phone and, for the first time in months, called his friend Parker. Owen. Parker's voice was surprised. Everything okay? Actually, Owen said, unable to keep the smile out of his voice, everything's perfect. And I think it's time I told you why. The conversation that followed was easier than Owen had imagined it would be. Parker's enthusiastic support and complete lack of surprise made Owen realize that maybe he'd been the only one who hadn't seen this coming. That night, as Owen sat at his kitchen table writing tomorrow's note for Jake, he thought about how different his life felt from just 24 hours ago. The words came easily now, without the careful editing and second-guessing that had plagued him for weeks. He wrote about looking forward to their dinner, about how holding Jake's hand had felt like coming home, about how grateful he was that Jake had been patient enough to wait for him to figure himself out. As he folded the note and tucked it into his wallet, Owen realized that for the first time in his adult life, he was genuinely excited about tomorrow. Not just the part of tomorrow that included Jake, though that was certainly the highlight, but all of it. He was excited to be himself without apology, excited to explore this relationship without fear, excited to see what other changes honesty might bring to his life. The next morning, as Owen walked to work with Jake's note burning a happy hole in his pocket, He understood that their tradition of coffee and handwritten messages had evolved into something even better. A relationship built on the foundation of genuine communication and mutual care. When he saw Jake already at the espresso machine, preparing 2 cups of coffee with that concentrated focus Owen adored, he knew he was exactly where he belonged. "Good morning," Jake said, offering him a cup and a folded piece of paper. "Good morning," Owen replied, trading his own note for Jake's. As they read each other's words in the quiet moments before the cafe opened, Owen realized that while their note-writing had started as a way to communicate the things they couldn't say out loud, it had become something more precious. A daily reminder that they had chosen each other, and that they would keep choosing each other, one honest conversation at a time.